Medieval punishments were not designed to correct behavior or rehabilitate criminals. They were designed to terrify. Justice in the Middle Ages was public, brutal, and deliberately cruel. Punishment was not only about the person who committed the crime, but about everyone who watched it happen. Pain was a message. Suffering was a warning. Fear was the law. In medieval society, the body itself became a tool of justice. Flesh was beaten, burned, broken, branded, and destroyed in full view of the community. There was no expectation of mercy, fairness, or proportionality. A minor offense could result in lifelong injury or death. Survival often depended more on status and wealth than on guilt or innocence. Public punishments were central to medieval life. Executions, mutilations, and humiliations were carried out in marketplaces, town squares, and crossroads where crowds gathered. Children watched. Families attended. Punishment was treated as both spectacle and civic duty. To look away was unusual. To protest was dangerous. One of the most common punishments was flogging. Whipping was used for theft, disobedience, debt, moral crimes, and even minor disturbances. The victim was tied to a post or cart and beaten with rods, whips, or cords. Skin tore. Blood flowed. Infections followed. Many died days later, not from the punishment itself, but from wounds that festered without treatment. Branding was another frequent sentence. Hot irons were pressed into flesh to mark criminals permanently. Thieves might be branded on the hand or face. Prostitutes, heretics, and repeat offenders carried marks for life. These scars ensured social exclusion long after the punishment ended. Branded individuals struggled to find work, shelter, or protection. Mutilation was widely accepted. Hands were cut off for theft. Ears were removed for lying or fraud. Tongues were cut out for blasphemy or false testimony. Eyes could be gouged out for treason or rebellion. These punishments were meant to permanently disable and shame. A mutilated body became walking proof of the state's power. The pillory and stocks were punishments of humiliation rather than pain, but they were no less dangerous. Victims were locked into wooden frames in public spaces for hours or days. Crowds hurled stones, rotten food, animal waste, and sometimes knives. People spat, mocked, and beat the restrained person. Many died from exposure, dehydration, or mob violence. Prisons were not places of long-term punishment. They were holding spaces before trial, ransom, or execution. Conditions were horrific. Prisoners were chained, starved, beaten, and left in darkness. Disease spread rapidly. Rats bit sleeping inmates. Many died without ever receiving a sentence. Execution methods varied by crime, region, and social class. Hanging was the most common form of death for common criminals. It was slow and painful. Victims often strangled for several minutes, convulsing while crowds watched. Sometimes the rope was short, ensuring prolonged suffering rather than a quick death. Beheading was considered a more honorable execution, usually reserved for nobles. Even so, it was far from humane. Executioners were not always skilled. Multiple strikes were sometimes required. Botched beheadings horrified crowds but did not stop the practice. Burning at the stake was used for heresy, witchcraft, and certain moral crimes. Death by fire was one of the most feared punishments imaginable. Flames consumed flesh slowly. Smoke suffocated lungs. Screams echoed through the square. Burning was meant to purify the soul through agony and erase the offender completely. Boiling alive was used in rare but terrifying cases, particularly for poisoning. Victims were lowered into vats of boiling water, oil, or tar. The pain was unimaginable. This punishment was designed to match the perceived cruelty of the crime. Breaking on the wheel was among the most brutal methods. The victim's limbs were shattered with a heavy wheel or iron bar. Bones snapped. Organs ruptured. The broken body was sometimes left alive for hours or days, displayed as a warning. Death came slowly through shock, blood loss, or exposure. Crucifixion, while less common in later medieval Europe, still appeared in certain regions. The body was nailed or tied to wood and left to die slowly. Exposure, dehydration, and suffocation ended life over many hours. Women faced unique punishments. Accusations of adultery, infanticide, or witchcraft often led to death. Women could be drowned, burned, or buried alive. Punishments reflected deep misogyny and fear. Confessions were frequently extracted through torture. Torture was legally accepted in many medieval courts. Pain was considered a reliable path to truth. Devices such as the rack, strappado, thumbscrews, and iron boots were used to extract confessions. Bones were dislocated. Muscles tore. Victims often confessed to anything to end the suffering. Once a confession was obtained, guilt was assumed, even if the confession was clearly coerced. Innocence offered little protection. Being accused was often enough to destroy a life. Punishments were deeply unequal. Wealthy individuals could pay fines, bribes, or secure lighter sentences. Poor people suffered the harshest penalties. Justice favored power. Laws existed, but enforcement was selective and corrupt. Children were not spared. Young offenders could be whipped, branded, or executed. There was no clear concept of childhood innocence. Survival meant obedience. Mistakes could be fatal. Religious crimes were punished especially harshly. Blasphemy, heresy, and apostasy threatened not just society, but God Himself. The Church supported severe penalties, believing fear preserved faith. Spiritual authority reinforced physical cruelty. Even after death, punishment continued. Bodies were displayed on gallows. Heads were placed on spikes. Corpses were left to rot as warnings. Families were often forbidden from burying their dead. Fear was constant. People watched their words, actions, and associations carefully. A wrong accusation, a jealous neighbor, or political shift could lead to arrest and torture. Law was unpredictable and dangerous. Medieval punishment shaped behavior through terror. It discouraged rebellion, enforced obedience, and maintained rigid hierarchies. Violence was normalized. Suffering was public entertainment. Yet punishments did not eliminate crime. They created trauma, resentment, and cycles of brutality. Communities learned to accept cruelty as order. Understanding medieval punishments reveals a world where justice was not humane or balanced, but raw and unforgiving. Law was carved into flesh. Authority spoke through pain. Survival meant submission. To live in the Middle Ages was to know that a single mistake could cost a hand, a tongue, or a life. Punishment was not an exception, it was a visible, ever-present force shaping daily existence. And for countless people, justice did not mean fairness. It meant fear, blood, and silence.